So we appear to be living in a pot-free zone. It's true. The feds have kind of bobbled the opportunity to change the law as it currently exists, though they have stated their intention to decriminalize marijuana. While at the same time, a judge here in Ontario, in a judgment upheld by even more senior court, threw out the existing law as being unconstitutional, against the spirit of the Charter of Rights. So we're in a peculiar never-never land. Nonetheless, in various other parts of the country, prosecutions continue. And last time Marc Emery appeared here, he mesmerized us all by reminding us that something like 650,000 to 700,000 Canadians have criminal records for the possession of minor amounts of marijuana, and what that then does to their lives. The rate of prosecution continues at somewhere around 20,000 prosecutions a year. Different jurisdictions apply the law in different ways, and there are some people who think that all those resources perhaps could be applied in another way, fighting real crime. Is it me, or is there something weirdly inconsistent, even in this approach to new law, when that law says it's okay to smoke small amounts, but it's not okay to either buy it or grow it? I don't get that part, except that it seems to me that if it ever takes root, it's a way of driving casual consumers even further into the hands of criminals. So I don't get it, and I'm hoping that Marc Emery, who's made a very courageous lifetime of advocating against the current situation, can come up and explain it to us. Marc's been raided 10 times. He's been arrested 8 times. He's gone to jail 4 times. Nonetheless, he and his amazing assistant, Michelle Rainey, who's also in the audience here, keep up the good fight.
Thank you. Well, despite my best efforts, more people are in jail for marijuana throughout the world than any other time in mankind's history. And it's 2003, and marijuana has been cultivated by civilizations for over 12,000 years now. In fact, about 30,000 people are convicted in Canada each year. In fact, that's 1 every 6 minutes. So I'll get to that statistics. But 30,000 people are convicted for a marijuana offense in Canada each year, and that's cultivating and selling, and mostly just possessing. Mostly just young people, actually, too. And, but actually many more are even arrested. 90,000 Canadians are rousted and detained for marijuana. About 50 to 60,000 get charged. A number of charges are dropped and various things. So you get 30,000 convictions. But for example, I'll show you, I was raided last year in my home, and you know, it's weird. You get a call at 3:30 in the morning, and you always know it's a bad call at 3:30 in the morning. You know, your kids are in trouble. I've got 4 kids. They're all in their 20s now, but it's still possible. You know, any call at 3:30 in the morning, oh, I'll leave that call, let it ring. They'll go away. You're hoping it's a long-distance call from somewhere far away, and they've got the wrong number. And it's 3:30 in the morning, and I finally get up. It's persistent. I pick up the phone, and they go, Marc Emery, and I say, yes. This is the Victoria Police Department. We have your house surrounded. And his house surrounded? And they said, yes, we have a search warrant to enter your premises, and we want you to come outside your front door. And they said, don't put any clothes on. What are you wearing? I said, I'm in my underwear. I said, just go to your front door and walk outside to the sidewalk. And so I walk out there, and you know, you open the door at 3:30 in the morning, and it's crystal cool. And I'm looking around thinking, well, maybe it's a hoax, and it's a really good one, I hope, because I'm really kind of scared and curious. And then finally, Marc Emery, walk out to the sidewalk. And then I walk to the sidewalk, and sure enough, 8 police officers come from behind trees and trucks, and they surround me outside on the sidewalk in my underwear. And, you know, you're very acutely aware that cops are really big people, multinational. You know, there's black people, there's a woman, there's Chinese, but they're all around me. And they say, Marc, and we have a warrant to enter your premises. And I said, well, let's all go in. It's very cold. I felt acutely almost naked in just my underwear with all these uniforms. And we went inside, and lead officer takes a big sniff, and he says, well, guess it's obvious why we're here. And I go, no, why are you here? And he says, well, it's the smell of your grow-op going on here. And I said, I don't have a grow-op. He said, look yourself, right? And of course, he trundles through my house, and he comes back 20 seconds later looking sheepish and disappointed, and all the other officers, and they all bow their heads, and they walk out. And one officer stays there and says, well, I guess we made a mistake. I should explain how we got the warrant to enter your premises. I said, yeah, I'd like to know that. He says, well, we walked by last Wednesday and we smelt marijuana coming from your house. I said, well, that's normal. We made an agreement with the landlord. We blow the smoke out the windows. We try not to smoke in the house. And he says, well, from there we decided to get a warrant to enter your premises, and we looked at your hydrometer and we smelled the exhaust fan from your dryer exhaust. And I go, yeah, and he says, well, we thought the dryer exhaust smelled a little bit like marijuana, and we found your power consumption was a little high. And I go, well, that's wrong. I said, and anyway, they said, well, that's how we got it, and they left. Now, unfortunately, I have some influence. I've got a magazine, Cannabis Culture magazine. There's free copies for you here, and I have a video, TV, I just can't call it TV, a video webcasting service called Pot TV. We've produced over 1,000 shows in the last 4 years, and over 4 million people have viewed these shows. And you can also look at that out there in the anterooms. But nonetheless, I was able to call the media, and they came by, and the reporter next day, yep, sure smells like vanilla bounce out of this dryer exhaust hose. And then they called the Hydro up, and Hydro said, that rate's the lowest on the block. It's like $75 a month, right? So clearly the police fabricated the warrant just to get inside my house, see what I was doing. And I wasn't doing anything, so which they would have known because the dryer exhaust smelled like vanilla bounce and not marijuana, and the power consumption was low. And so they knew really that there was not going to be nothing like that in there. But anyway, so that doesn't even show up as a statistic. I get woken up at 3:30 by 8 police officers going through my house and making me very uneasy. And of course, I've been raided 5 times, and I have been arrested 10 times. But that doesn't count. See, I wasn't arrested. It doesn't show up in any statistics. So everybody who gets raided in the middle of the night like me, like some police state, doesn't even show up on a statistic because I didn't get charged for anything. Things like that happen all the time. However, it could get worse. In New York City alone, they arrest 75,000 people a year for marijuana, and every last one of them has to go to jail overnight. In New York City, if you get arrested, you have to go to jail overnight. And you're thinking, well, what's one jail overnight? But I'll tell you this, because I'm sort of at a media center in the marijuana industry, and I'll get to more of those later, I hear everything, all the injustices around the world, and I get swamped with them. And it sometimes makes my life very sad. I feel privileged that I'm only in jail overnight sometimes, or I get raided at 3:30 in the morning, and they go away eventually, and I can call the media to come to my rescue or at least verify what's going on. A lot of other people have no such opportunity. In New York City, everybody goes to jail overnight, 70,000 people. You wouldn't want to be in a New York jail overnight. But for example, in the weekend before last, a 19-year-old boy, it's all he is, I'm 45 years old if you're a 19-year-old boy to me. My kids are all older than that, and I still call them boys. And he delivered marijuana on his bicycle on the university campus of Gainsborough, small amounts. People would call up on their thing, and he'd take $20, $30 over them and deliver. Well, he got caught, and he got put in jail, and this was just like 10 days ago in Gainesville, Florida, and he was really brutally raped by a sexual predator put in the same cell beside him. Now, he wouldn't normally tell this, but his parents have gone public to say that in the 2 days he was held over the weekend, and in that brief time he had a pen shoved to his neck, and he was sexually assaulted, raped by a sexual predator who's been kept in the same cell for the last year. And of course they always say, well, budget cutbacks and what have you, and these things are going to happen. But here's a 19-year-old carrying $20 worth of marijuana someplace, gets thrown in jail, and now the whole course of his life is irrevocably changed, right? But it can get worse. Like I was in Rolling Stone last week. I'm a lucky guy. I get to be in lots of media. They wrote a nice article about me last week in Monsters of Rock Summer, so it'll sell really well to the young people. And it's about a fellow that we help, and I'm pleased to say I'm able to help a lot of people to some degree. But anyway, a fellow named Webster Alexander, 19-year-old boy, never had any trouble with the law, nothing ever. But in Alabama is a dark hole of sentencing for all sorts of things. People go away for a long time. He had sold the principal of his high school, a good student, by the way, never had any trouble with any. Good principal of his high school brought in an undercover police officer to pose as a student in a little town called Moulton, Alabama. And the police officer would go around to the students, and he'd solicit, who can sell me weed, in a party, blah, blah, blah. So he meets this one fellow, Webster Alexander, who sells him a half an ounce of marijuana on 3 occasions. Total of an ounce, half net value, $350 and less in Canada. And they arrest him, and they actually want 90 years in jail for him. And the reason being, even though he sold the marijuana in his home was 3 miles within a school district and 3 miles within a housing project, and all these escalating things happened, and so they plea bargained him, and they settled on a sentence of 26 years in state prison. And I heard about this. Somebody sent this to me, Mark. And I checked, and they don't even give determinations like that in China, and the worst place in the world. So we tried to help them. We created a big hue and cry. I have organizations throughout the United States. I formed the BC Marijuana Party a couple of years ago as sort of a self-defense, and we participated in elections in British Columbia. And we've formed 20 U.S. state marijuana parties in the United States. They're funded to some degree or largely by me. And we have one in Alabama. So we got together and we got all the media outrage. I even got the Toronto Sun to fly down to Alabama to interview this fellow and cover what was going on and how many other people were just dying away in Alabama jails for decades and decades for the most inconsequential of things. And I'll tell you about one of those in a second. But anyway, Webster got sentenced to 26 years, and we made a big hue and cry. Rolling Stone went down to interview everybody, and they made a big hue and cry just before his sentencing review was last week. And 26 years is 312 months. And the judge saying that these activists had nothing to do with it to the public, to the gallery, but cut his sentence down to 1 month and another 9 months on work release, meaning he's got a full-time job, he can work during the day and go back to the prison at night and on weekends. So to some degree, we've shaved 311 months off his sentence of 312 months. And Rolling Stone was kind enough to imply that I had a lot to do with that, and probably I had something to do with it anyway. But the fact is that young men shouldn't spend a night in jail. People tell me, and there's another fellow too, and we have lots of these, some people you can't help, but Douglas Lamar Gray has been in an Alabama jail since 1992 with life sentence without parole. That's an indeterminate number, well beyond 25, life sentence without parole for just buying, not selling, buying 1 pound of marijuana from an undercover officer in 1992. He was 22 years of age, he has 2 children, and he's been serving 11 years since then for buying 1 pound of marijuana. This goes on all over the world, but especially in the United States. And it doesn't just happen in the United States. People say, oh, thank goodness that wouldn't happen here. But in fact, it does happen here. One of the other cases I'm spending lots of money on is a fellow in Halifax Penitentiary. His name is Michael Patriquin. Now, Michael Patriquin actually has a legal exemption from the Canadian government to grow marijuana and possess marijuana. And in fact, he's been doing this all his life, and he was convicted of growing and selling 4.5 kilograms, about 10 or 11 pounds of marijuana. And he was sentenced to 6 years in jail, which they intend to make him serve. He's in his 2nd year, but he needs the marijuana because he had a car accident 10 years ago, and he's all crippled up. He's in a really bad way, and they give him lots of drugs that make him nauseous and for his accident. And the only thing that keeps him from being nauseous is marijuana. But they won't let him have it in prison, even though he has a legal requirement. So we're spending lots of money, and we've got a decision coming back in the next week. We're trying to force the federal government to allow him to eat some marijuana cookies, maybe 3 or 4 a day. That's all. We're just asking him. He can get marijuana in jail. But the funny thing is that if you smoke marijuana and your urine test, which they do on him all the time, test positive, then he gets put in solitary confinement, where he won't be able to get the marijuana and he won't have any company, and it'll just be a dark black hole. And he's already lost 65 pounds. He was 210 pounds. Now he's 138 pounds. He loses more weight every week. And all we're asking for the federal is to let him have a marijuana cookie, which he's legally allowed to have. And he's serving 6 years. And he's not contesting the 6 years anymore. In order to sue the federal government, we have to take away all those claims and just get to the 6 years. So it does happen in Canada. People are wasting away in jail for the want of a marijuana cookie they're allowed to have, serving 6 years in jail. By the way, that 10 pounds of marijuana, I had something called the Toker's Bowl, which I do every year in Vancouver. We have 250 people. In fact, a lot of people from IdeaCity in the past have come, by the way. And I won't name names, but you might meet them tonight. And we have this big ceremony. I have 25 different kinds of marijuana. But basically, throughout the weekend, I distribute 20 pounds of marijuana. Everybody gets 25 1-gram samples, 250 people, times, everybody's got 1 ounce. It's about we give out 20 pounds. And I'm thinking, here's a man spending 6 years in a Canadian jail for just distributing half of what I give out routinely. And I'm thinking, wow, that's shocking. And of course, the Canadian government has new proposals for marijuana. And they're proposing something that I'm calling recriminalization, because actually Ontario is the one jurisdiction in the whole world, in the whole Western world, where marijuana is absolutely legal. You can possess it, you won't get charged, and I plan to have a demonstration in front of the Toronto Police Headquarters tomorrow at 4:20 in the afternoon. It's been announced, and I'm sorry to say I'll have to miss that speaker, but I will be down the street in front of the Toronto Police Headquarters smoking marijuana, and quite obviously possessing it and daring the police to take it away from me, because there have been 2 court decisions here in Ontario that have validated that there is no marijuana law, that the government has failed in the past to provide adequate medical marijuana laws, and you can tell that when a guy has to basically starve to death just to get a marijuana cookie in jail. There's no marijuana laws. Of May 16th, Justice Stephen Rogan said, listen, the government's been very negligent and derelict, and the previous court of, so basically there's no marijuana law. This is the first place in the Western world where marijuana is completely free of any kind of legal sanction. So I hope you'll all celebrate that with me tonight as I bring you some of the marijuana we had at the Toker's Bowl. Fine stuff it is. But I don't want to distract with, we can do the celebration of the marijuana culture later on. I want to tell you something else I did that hopefully will render this all inert, in that I for 8 years, have been guiding some fellow litigants and defendants who've been accused of marijuana offenses finally to get to the Supreme Court. There's never been a marijuana case that got to the Supreme Court since we've had the Charter of Rights, and that's 1982. So 20 years have passed. Marijuana, I finally was able to pay for, I'm the chief sponsor and pay for, finally getting these 3 people to the Supreme Court in the first weekend of May. And the Supreme Court heard our argument. And the argument was basically one simple passion. Why should anyone ever go to jail for even a day for possessing or growing or distributing one of the most revered and righteous and useful plants ever known to mankind? I mean, even if we recognize, as the Constitution says, we recognize the supremacy of God as the first words in the Constitution, surely this was put here for a reason, and that grows everywhere on this planet for a reason. I mean, Carl Sagan, we've had a lot of scientists early today, and when I think about the scientists, I thought about the cosmos. Carl Sagan smoked marijuana every day of his adult life. He developed every scientific theory by his own words, and is what his wife has told me, on marijuana. He used to smoke in the morning, he used to smoke at night, he used to doodle in the shower after he'd smoked it. If you took your CD collection, by the way, and divided it between the people who created that music on marijuana and put that to one side, and who did not use marijuana on the other side, I have no doubt every single one of you would say, no, I'm keeping the marijuana guys. Okay? So when you consider that something like this plant has brought such enlightenment to such a wide range of interests, and by the way, Shakespeare smoked marijuana, they found that in his pipes, and I don't want to be sacrilegious to anyone, but not only did Jesus wear hemp at the time of Christ, but Christ in its original language means the anointed one. And in those days, marijuana and hashish were everywhere. That plant grew wild, feral almost, throughout the entire Middle East, and Christ was known, and there's much proof of this, to bathe in it. They didn't smoke marijuana so much as they put it in oils, and they put it on their body, and this was a way for coming in contact with God. And anybody who's had a truly profound experience would know it. So we went to the Supreme Court. We've asked the Supreme Court to say, end this madness, end this nonsense. There's no way in the world any Canadian should ever suffer because of this most beautiful plant. No young person, no old person. And that having been said, I'm going to be protesting tomorrow night at 4:20 in front of the police department, so wish me well. But that's not even why I came. I didn't actually come to speak about marijuana today because I'm doing something really, really, really fascinating, and it's what I really want to tell you about. And it still says green, so that's good. And I've got a cure for drug addiction. Now, I know that sounds facetious and awful and what have you, but in fact, I was on the CBC National News about 3 weeks ago in a big long segment for 15 minutes, and it followed me around as I treat hardcore drug addicts on methadone, on heroin, on morphine, on crack cocaine, on methamphetamine, and how I give these people a very large dose of an unusual plant extract. And of course, Wade Davis will be speaking in the days ahead, and he might have some familiarity with this. It comes from Gabon and Cameroon, and it's an unusual plant called the iboga plant. It's a shrub, actually. And they found that the third layer of the root bark, I don't even know how they would have found that out, but the third layer of the root bark has an alkaloid in it, which, as it turns out, a man named Howard Lotsoff, while traveling through Gabon in 1962, found that he was a heroin user, and they made him eat all these roots, and it brings on fabulous visualizations. Usually the Bwiti people of Gabon, they have ceremonies to use it to connect to their ancestors and to connect to the past. Drug addiction amongst their people is unknown, so they have no known application like we have discovered it. But Howard Lotsoff, who later developed a PhD in pharmacology and other sciences, he found that his drug addiction the next morning after eating all these roots was completely evaporated. He had no cravings, no withdrawal, nothing at all. He was stunned. And it lasted him 5 years. He later, 5 years later, takes up a heroin habit briefly, but it lasted for 5 years. And so what happens, I read all this science, and I thought, well, this is fascinating. I wonder why no one's ever doing this. And in fact, that's what I have begun to do. Starting last September, I've been treating people for chronic and long-term, people who've been addicted 5 to 15 years. And I've treated 23 people. They take me about 2 to 12 days each. The methadone people are the hardest. It's a long-lasting opiate. It's tremendously difficult. I have to give them 2 treatments about 5 days apart, but eventually they too are all cleared. Let me just tell you, all 23 people I've treated lives are much improved. Most of them are definitely drug-free, and anyone who has lapsed has only lasted on 1 or 2 occasions, not even for a long stretch, but just simply 1 or 2 times, and then they call us up because they feel guilty. They call me up, they say, I used once, I'm sorry. It's not like they need to apologize to me, but what happens when you take Ibogaine, I give you a concentrated amount, and within about 1 hour, your withdrawal symptoms start to evaporate. Within about 2 hours, they're completely gone, which is the most remarkable thing. It's like an incredible detoxing of the mind, of the body. And they see fabulous visualizations of what will happen to them if they keep abusing these drugs. And they see apocalyptic visions of their own end, and a terribly frightening thing. And what happens is that sooner or later, throughout the experience, which, by the way, these visualizations can go on anywhere from 2 to 8 hours generally, but up to actually 102 hours. I've had some people go 4 days in a complete visualization, like they're out there. But what they're doing is they're reinvestigating. They see their past. A screen seems to come down in front of their eyes like a movie screen, and images happen very quickly, exhaustingly, and they're very exhausted throughout this process. And they see all the decisions of their past and a lot of their childhood where they made these wrong decisions, they think, or where things have gone wrong for them. And so not only they detox physically, they come out of this completely free of withdrawal, completely free of cravings, but they get an incredible insight into their past and their background and why they are addicted. And there's something else I discovered too. The caution light is on. So here's a fascinating thing. I've treated 23 people, about 1 a week. They take anywhere from 2 to 14 days, like I said, 2 to 12. And I asked them lots of questions about their background, how they grew up, and all 23 of them, this is a phenomenal thing. When you think about the roots of drug addiction, we often blame the drug user, well, he has this conscious choice, that sort of thing. You know what? I grew up with 2 parents who loved me. They were always home every night. They never were away once. I never saw drinking in my house. My parents never even yelled at each other. I knew nothing of any kind of trauma or disruption in my environment. I grew up a happy, loved kid. I had a great time. I remember only fond things. You know what? All the 23 people I've treated, none of these people had any of that. Every single one of them had a traumatic childhood experience involving the abandonment of one parent. In fact, in all 23 cases, the male parent is not there by age 8. From 0 to 8, every single male parent of those 23 people I've treated, 7 females and about 15 males, was absent. Now, Sheldon, my first patient, for example, he was actually born in prison of his mother who murdered the father after he raped her. He was born into that environment. You know, when you hear stories like that, and then Ileana, she was abandoned at age 2 and has been traumatized by it ever since, such that she's worried about her parenting skills, which she thinks are terrible. It's traumatized her ever since. She was on methadone. To just kill, they have this wounded soul, these people who are abandoned, or these people have these traumatic childhoods, and they have this wounded soul, and they use these drugs to take away the pain. Pain I would never know. See, I'm on the outside looking at. People often ask me, have you taken Ibogaine? I said, no, I don't even have the slightest curiosity. I don't have any addictive tendencies, and all I know is it does these fabulous things to every single person I've treated. And by the way, it's not illegal to do this. But the problem is and I was going to tell you about more of my patients. It's not illegal. It's quite available. And by the way, I have a website called ibogatherapyhouse.org. I treat anybody that can make it there. We want a blood test and a heart scan, but we cover everything. There's no charge for any of this. Everybody I know in every walk of life knows someone with a substance abuse problem. This is a wonderful miracle. You should check it on the website out in the ante rooms with our other sites, and the red light's on, and I have to go. So I'll tell you what, I was wrong earlier when I said more people are in jail now for marijuana than any other time in mankind, because that was 15 minutes ago, and more people have gotten to jail since. So right now, there's more people in jail for marijuana offenses than any other time in history. But I do know this. There's 23 people who are no longer addicted to hardcore drugs, and there's going to be many more to come. So, thanks very much. Perfect.